about 30 years, Mr. Kerry Robertson. You know, I've been watching the number of people that have come and gone, and I don't know what your expectations were, but my expectations have been exceeded. I'm very grateful for the people that have turned out tonight, and it's a real tribute to you, Luann, that people would come out, and I know probably there were a lot of people who were driving over here and couldn't see out their windshield, and they may have turned around and gone home. So this is very, very impressive to me, and I appreciate all of you being here. I want to take just a few minutes and give you some insight. I first met Luann in, I believe it was September or August of 2009, and the congressional race, it was at the McDonald's there at Harding Lane, and I was thinking about running for Congress, and I'd heard that Luann was thinking about running for Congress, and I was trying to say to her, if you decide not to run, would you please support me? But I was trying not to say that I'm not going to run, because I knew I was going to run. And so we had a conversation, and then, of course, we both ended up in the race and campaigned side by side, really, for the better part of a year. And during this race, it really started to get a lot of publicity late in the race. And I want to talk about a couple of incidents that occurred, because they're things that you don't always read about in the paper. Sometimes you have an insider's perspective when you're there. Well, during this race, it got to a point where accusations would kind of go back and forth. And so, for example, I would challenge Representative Black on whether or not she'd ever voted on a tax increase. And her response was, well, that's not a tax, that's a fee, and everybody knows the difference. Well, to me, it just means the taxpayers are paying more money, so I really don't care what you call it. It's an increase in what it cost us. And one of the things that came up in this race was the question about whether or not the office had been misused. The state office had been misused for personal gain. And Luann's not going to mention this at all, and if I'm saying this and I shouldn't, I'm sorry. I didn't ask her first. But Luann ended up being sued. She ended up being sued for a political ad that she did. And what you can barely read in the media is that a judge heard everything, and he sided so overwhelmingly with Luann that it never went to trial. Luann won on a summary judgment. And I'm going to paraphrase the judge where he said, the defense is always, the truth is always a defense. And so Luann was vindicated, and she was vindicated back in probably, March or April or sometime in there, and hardly anybody knows about it. What they remember is, they remember a campaign where there was some fussing and fighting and some people going after each other, and a lot of people were talking about the rematch and what was going to happen. Well, here's what happened with me. The race was tight, and Diane won by less than 300 votes. And the first thing that we did after that race was we did a unity tour to show support for Diane. Now I want to tell you something that Luann knows, but none of you know. I didn't invite Luann to be part of that tour. I just didn't do it, because of all the stuff that had gone on, and I knew that there was some raw feelings, and I didn't invite Diane or Luann to join in. And it had been a hard-fought race. Diane won, and we were going to line up behind Diane and show our support for her. And I didn't necessarily think that Diane had been the most conservative state senator, but she talked the talk on the campaign trail, and maybe she'd seen the light, maybe she'd go to Washington and vote the way that we wanted her to vote. So we lined up behind her and had this unity tour, and I'm the one who did not invite Lou Ann Zelenik to be a part of that unity tour. Well, fast forward a couple of months, and Diane won the general election, and then I think sometime around Thanksgiving, she resigned her Senate seat. And a lot of people came to me and said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to run for this seat or not? And I decided that I would run for it. Well, it was pitting the Sumner County elite, political elite, against, the guy from Robertson County, who a lot of people didn't think would stand a chance. And during this time, in the early days of it, I got a phone call. It came completely out of the blue. And it was Lou Ann. And Lou Ann said, I'm going to paraphrase, and sorry if I don't get it quite right. She said, I've known you for about a year or so, and I've watched you on the campaign trail, and I've watched how you've grown and matured and how you kind of developed yourself. And she said, I've thought basically all along that you need to run for office someday. And obviously she didn't want me to win that other election, but stay with it and go after it and run for office and try and serve. And she said, I don't think that there would be a finer state senator than you, and I want to ask your permission to call the people who supported me in Sumner County and Robertson County and ask them to support you. Now just think about that for a minute. What had I done for her? Not a thing. In fact, I even snubbed her, you might say. And yet here she was on the phone. That was the past. She didn't bring it up. She didn't say a word. To this day, she's never brought it up. And that tells you a lot about the kind of person that Lou Ann is. See, what Lou Ann does is she fights for what she believes in. And if she sees something that she believes is good, or she sees something that she thinks is worthwhile, then she's going to go for it. She's going to support it. And even though I didn't deserve her support, she gave me her support, and I'm completely convinced that because of her support, it played a very pivotal role in me winning that election. Well, fast forward a few more months, and we had an opportunity to see if somebody talked the talk. I'm just going to say this. I spent a lot of time on the campaign trail, and I heard a lot of promises that we weren't going to spend more money in Washington. But I'm completely convinced that Lou Ann would have never sided with the Democrats and would never have handed President Obama $2+ trillion more to spend. And that was the moment in time that what Jeff said a minute ago, every 2 years we have an opportunity to hold somebody accountable for what they've done. And there may have been a lot of other fantastic votes. There may have been a lot of other really good votes, but that one's the deal breaker for me. Because this country doesn't have $2 more trillion to go in debt. The taxpayers don't have $2 trillion more. Our children don't have $2 trillion more, and certainly our grandchildren don't have it. At some point in time, somebody has to have the courage to say enough is enough. And you can say, well, we only have the House, we don't have the White House and the Senate. Well, then let the House stand up for what's right. Why do we have to wait for the Senate? Why do we have to wait for the President? So today, we're here trying to get people engaged in the process. It's been a very quiet election so far. But we have an opportunity to send somebody to Washington who I can't even begin to imagine would vote for any spending increases, who would vote for any tax increases, no hidden mortgage taxes or things like that in legislation. Someone who's not going to be beholden to leadership. Someone who can't be bought, who can't be sold. And that's our opportunity. But I'm going to tell you something. For it to happen, there's some people with some red shirts around here. There's not enough red shirts to make it happen. And every one of us is going to have to get involved. And every one of us needs to have our own red shirt. And we need to be out there knocking the doors in our neighborhood, talking to our friends and talking to our neighbors. And it's a very simple message, and it can be a very positive message. But if we don't get engaged and if we don't get involved, then we're going to get, as is often said, the government that we deserve. Well, back to Luann. I'm sorry, I've kind of got going there, and you came to hear Luann and not me.
Oh, go ahead. I'm loving this.
I can, there's a lot of personal testimonies that I'm sure you can hear from people, Tammy and Robert, Jeff, and some others who've worked side by side with Luann and can tell you all kinds of wonderful things about her. But I think I can tell you more than anyone that I'm somebody who never deserved her support, and I got it. And I'm indebted to her, and I'm proud to support her, and I want you to welcome Luann Zelenik to Robertson.